Mr. Swalwell. Now, the room is bigger than this picture. Mr. Dearborn. Not much. Pretty tiny room. Swalwell. Are there individuals who are not pictured in the... Dearborn. Yeah, they're probably... Swalwell. Who are in the room but not pictured in the... Dearborn. Yes, there would have been some people probably standing against this wall, like a small number against this wall. And it would have been probably the different entourage individuals that were with the then candidate. Swalwell. Was Corey Lewandowski in that meeting? Dearborn. I don't remember if Corey was in there for the whole thing. I'm trying to remember who from the campaign was there. Swalwell. But was Corey Lewandowski there at some point? Dearborn. I'm guessing that he was. I have to always try to figure out, like... Swalwell. Mr. Dearborn, I don't want you to guess. If you don't recall... Dearborn. I don't remember. But only because I can't remember when Corey left and Manafort came on kind of thing. But it was end of March. Swalwell, March 31st. Dearborn. Yeah, so I'm assuming that he was. Swalwell. How about Hope Hicks? Was she in the room? Dearborn. Gosh, it's really tapping my memory. I hadn't been asked this. I don't recall Hope being there, but she could have been. Like I said, he had an entourage of people, and a lot of people were kind of coming in and out. Swalwell. How about Keith Schiller? Dearborn. Keith would have been somewhere close by. Swalwell. And that's just your observation of where Keith always would be. Dearborn. Yeah. Swalwell. Around candidate Trump. Dearborn. Yes, sir. Swalwell. Was Stephen Miller in the room? Dearborn. I can't remember if Stephen came down for this. For a policy discussion, he normally would be there. Swalwell. How about Sam Clovis? Dearborn. I think Sam was in the room. I think so. Just so you know, there was another room right here. And there were a group of, entourage or staff for him in there that were making phone calls and really weren't part of this meeting. Swalwell. For the candidate Trump? Dearborn. Right, yeah. Swalwell. George Papadopoulos said in his plea agreement that during the meeting he relayed that he had, quote, connections that could arrange a meeting between then candidate Trump and President Putin, end quote. Do you recall this being stated by Mr. Papadopoulos? Dearborn. I don't. I wasn't there for that comment. Swalwell. Okay, did Senator Sessions talk to you at all after the meeting about Mr. Papadopoulos' comment? Mr. Dearborn. No. Mr. Swalwell. Did you ever learn of Mr. Papadopoulos' offer any time throughout the campaign? Dearborn. I didn't. I only heard about it when all this news broke on it. Swalwell. As you know, Senator Sessions recently has testified to Congress that he responded or shot down Mr. Papadopoulos' offer when he made it at that meeting. Did you talk at all with Attorney General Sessions about press reporting of that meeting? Dearborn. I think we may have had one conversation, and I think we had one conversation. Swalwell. When was that? Dearborn. Oh, that would have been... Swalwell. Contemporaneous with Mr. Papadopoulos' guilty plea. Dearborn. Yeah, about... when all this stuff popped. I think. Swalwell. And what did Attorney General Sessions say to you about the meeting? Dearborn. I think all he said was, I remember. I pushed back on that when he raised that. Swalwell. Anything else that you recall? Dearborn. No, it was a very brief comment. Swalwell. Did Attorney General Sessions in that call contemporaneous to the Papadopoulos plea, did he say anything else about Russia? Dearborn. That was in person with him. That wasn't... Mr. Swalwell. Okay, sorry. Mr. Dearborn. Yeah. Mr. Swalwell. Was that at the White House? Mr. Dearborn. I don't think it was at the White House. Swalwell. Was it at the DOJ? That's Department of Justice. Dearborn. No, I think it was out. It may have been outside the DOJ, but not inside the building. I don't remember. Swalwell. Any other Russia-related conversations in that interaction? Dearborn. No. Swalwell. I'm going to show you just a piece of correspondence, but I want you to review it. Dearborn. Yes, sir. Swalwell. And just for our record, Bait Stamp 107 is a memo drafted by Mr. Dearborn after the RNC, prior to the RNC. Dearborn. Okay. Swalwell. Do you recognize that document, Mr. Dearborn? Dearborn. I do. Swalwell. And Mr. Chairman, we'll mark that as Exhibit 2, if that's all right. Conway. Without objection. Dearborn, Exhibit number 2 was marked for identification. Swalwell. The third bullet states, based upon foreign policy discussions in DNC. The third Monday, July 11th, bullet states, based upon foreign policy discussions in D.C. with the nominee in March regarding support to Ukraine, lethal assistance was a geopolitical concern raised in this discussion. Were you referring to the March 31st meeting that you had at Trump Hotel? Mr. Dearborn. I didn't write this document. I did compile it, but I didn't write it. Mr. Swalwell. So at the top of the document says, memo from Rick Dearborn. Is that right? Dearborn. It does. Swalwell. So who did compile it? Dearborn. J.D. Gordon. Swalwell. So J.D. sent this to you? Dearborn. Uh-huh. Swalwell. And was that to your campaign email? Dearborn. Yes, it should have been. Would have been. Swalwell. And how did it make its way into this document? Dearborn. What, this bullet? Swalwell. Yes. Dearborn. Because this would have been the sequence of events and his recollection of this amendment at the RNC convention. Swalwell. So what was the purpose of sending out this memo? Dearborn. So this memo came out in, is this right, in August or... Swalwell. The top of the document says August 1, 2016, after the RNC. Dearborn. Right. Yes, August 1. Probably as a response, again, to events in the news. And what was the... I think the request was what was the recollection of what happened at the convention on this particular issue? Swalwell. So what was your knowledge of the foreign policy discussions in D.C. with the nominee in March regarding support to Ukraine? Dearborn. So, like I told you, I wasn't in the room, so my knowledge is limited. It would have been secondhand. Swalwell. Did J.D. share with you discussions about lethal assistance to Ukraine? Dearborn, the only time I remember that would have been probably at the convention when this issue came up. Swalwell, we'll get to the convention in a few moments, but, so this was from J.D. to you. You put it into the memo because there were questions about... Dearborn, yeah. Swalwell, what happened with the Ukraine amendment? Dearborn, right. Swalwell, did you hear candidate Trump at all during the time you were in that March 31 meeting discuss his views toward Russia or Ukraine? Dearborn, no. Like I said, I really wasn't in the meeting for any period of time. Swalwell, were notes of the meeting memorialized in any way? Dearborn, none that I was made aware of or I was provided. Swalwell, were there any recordings at the meeting? Dearborn, none that I was aware of. Swalwell, did you meet George Papadopoulos at the meeting? Dearborn, I did not. Well, I mean... Swalwell, well, he was at the meeting. Dearborn, maybe I saw him across, but I don't remember going up and saying hi to all these guys. Remember, I was getting people in a room. They were sitting down. J.D. was there with Senator Sessions and the then candidate. They were having their discussion. I'm popping off to go do the next meeting. Mr. Swalwell, had you ever met George Papadopoulos before the meeting? Mr. Dearborn, no. Swalwell, and just so we're clear, Carter Page was not at the meeting. Is that right? Dearborn, not to my knowledge. Swalwell, when did you first meet Carter Page? Dearborn, I've never met Carter Page. Swalwell, have you ever talked to him on the phone? Dearborn, I have not. Swalwell, have you ever emailed back and forth with him? Dearborn, I don't believe I have, but if you produce something that shows I have, then maybe I did, but I can't remember. Swalwell, do you know whether Senator Sessions had ever met Carter Page? Dearborn, I don't believe he did. There is a reference that I've seen in the news that suggests they had a passing incident, but I don't remember that either. Swalwell, Senator Sessions has testified a couple of times now that Attorney General Sessions has testified a couple of times now that there was an interaction in June 2016 at the Capitol Hill Club where Carter Page referenced an upcoming trip to Russia. Did Senator Sessions ever discuss that with you on the campaign? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, did you ever talk with? Well, then are you familiar with Carter Page testifying to this committee? Dearborn, yeah, he's testified. I'm familiar with that, and I think he's testified in front of several folks, but I haven't really tracked it close. Swalwell, and his testimony was made public, and that's where it became publicly reported that he told Attorney General Sessions, then Senator Sessions, about going to Russia. Did you ever talk to Attorney General Sessions about this claim by Carter Page? Dearborn, Swalwell, that a no? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, when you were working for the campaign, did you become aware that Carter Page had traveled over to Russia? Dearborn, I didn't know him. Swalwell, but I understand you didn't know him, but it was publicly reported before the election that... Dearborn, I would have been made aware as reports came out. Prior to that, no. Swalwell, did you make any effort once it was publicly reported that Carter Page had gone to Russia to contact anyone on the campaign about what's going on. Dearborn: I don't know if I contacted anyone on the campaign. There probably were. If anyone was linked to the campaign and something came up about any issue, there usually were some emails that were sent around. Hey, do we know this guy? What is he doing? That kind of thing. Swalwell: do you recall if any of those emails were sent around with respect to Carter Page? Dearborn: I know that there were some with Papadopoulos wanting to travel and asking the campaign to pay for it. The Carter Page stuff, all I recall is interviews that he gave was a concern in trying to make representations about his role with the campaign. Not necessarily keyed in on travel per se, but... Swalwell: and did you talk to any of the senior principals on the campaign about Carter Page's interviews? Dearborn: no. Swalwell: did you ever meet George Papadopoulos face to face? Dearborn: I did in Cleveland. Swalwell: at the convention? Dearborn: I did. Yes, sir. Swalwell: where did you meet him at Cleveland? Which part of the convention? Dearborn: it was like during a break in the action at a round table. It was more kind of a social hi. I'm George Papp. Oh, how are you doing? Swalwell: what type of round table was that? Dearborn: I mean literally a round table. Swalwell: no, I mean like, oh, it wasn't a discussion or a meeting? Dearborn: no, it was a staff meeting room at a round table. Swalwell: teak? Dearborn: oak, I think. Sorry, I should have phrased that better. Swalwell: how would you describe his role on that foreign policy advisory team? Dearborn: how would I describe his role? He was a member of a national security working group. Swalwell: did you believe that he was qualified? Dearborn: I didn't really review his qualifications. He came in through Sam Clovis. Swalwell: did you have, throughout the campaign, Mr. Papadopoulos' cell phone number? Dearborn: I don't. Look, we probably did have a list of, like, cell numbers and email addresses. Swalwell: was it in your phone? Dearborn: no, I don't think it would have been in my phone. It would have been on a list that I could access. Swalwell: have you talked to Mr. Papadopoulos since the end of the campaign? Dearborn: no. Swalwell: how about since the inauguration? Dearborn: hold on. I want to make sure I get this right. Papadopoulos: I don't believe that I did. I can't remember if he had a role in the transition. At the time, I was executive director, and there were hundreds and hundreds of people. So could I have seen him there? Maybe, but I can't remember if he was even part of the transition or not. If you tell me he was, I wouldn't deny it, but... Swalwell: how about since the inauguration? Have you seen Mr. Papadopoulos? Dearborn: not that I can recall. Blank: 5 minutes, sir. Swalwell: tell me about the travel request that Mr. Papadopoulos was making to you. Dearborn: I don't know if he made. I can't remember if he made it direct to me. He may have. He made it probably through J.D. or even through John Mashburn. But he was inquiring whether or not he could travel and speak on behalf of the campaign, and if the campaign could pay for it. And our answer on how many occasions it was always no. We don't have the budget for that. Mr. Swalwell, where was he seeking to travel? Mr. Dearborn, it's probably listed. If you show me the document, I'd agree with you. I can't remember right off the top of my head. I can't remember if it was, I can't remember. Greece or something. I can't remember. Swalwell, was Mr. Papadopoulos traveling on his own dime and reporting back any of the meetings that he was taking? Dearborn, if he was, he would have reported back to J.D. Gordon. I don't know. Swalwell, was J.D. Gordon reporting to you about any travel of Mr. Papadopoulos? Dearborn, only when he requested to have the travel paid for by the campaign. Swalwell, and your recollection is that that was denied? Dearborn, yes. Swalwell, do you recall if he ever requested to travel to Russia? Dearborn, I don't recall that. Swalwell, do you recall whether Mr. Papadopoulos ever made any in-writing or phone requests to connect candidate Trump to Vladimir Putin? Dearborn, I don't remember that, but again, if there's anything in email you show me, I'll take a look at it. I just don't recall that. Swalwell, witnesses have informed the committee that Mr. Papadopoulos was involved in organizing candidate Trump's September 19, 2016, meeting with Egyptian President el-Sisi on the margins of the UN General Assembly. Do you recall that? Dearborn, I don't. Swalwell, were you involved in that at all? Dearborn, I wasn't. Swalwell, did you go to New York when that meeting occurred? Were you in New York when that meeting occurred? Dearborn, I don't believe so. Swalwell, do you have any knowledge of how candidate Trump's meeting with el-Sisi was organized? Dearborn, I don't. Swalwell, the British government has acknowledged a working-level meeting with Mr. Papadopoulos in his role as a campaign representative about 2 months before the election. Were you aware of this meeting? Dearborn, I don't believe I was, unless it was one of the ones that he said he was going to have on a trip he was going to take, and then I would only be aware of the trip, probably. Blank. 1 minute, sir. Mr. Dearborn, if you listed out they had meetings, fine, but I don't remember that. Mr. Swalwell, a committee witness has testified that Mr. Papadopoulos was directed by the campaign to engage in outreach to Orthodox Christian constituencies across the U.S. as part of the campaign Get Out the Vote effort prior to Election Day. Were you aware of any efforts like this? Dearborn, he may have worked with Bio Densinek, who was doing coalitions. Swalwell, what's the last name? Dearborn, Densinek. Swalwell, do you mind spelling that? Dearborn, it starts with a D and ends with a K, and in the middle is Ensinek. Denswynek. Something like that. Swalwell, I yield. Mr. Conway, Mr. Stewart, 45. Mr. Stewart of Utah, I was going to say before you attempted to spell that, you are under oath, right? So you don't want to mess that up. Mr. Dearborn, I'm sure I misspelled that. Mr. Stewart of Utah, Mr. Dearborn, thank you for being with us. Bill, as well, thank you both. We do have some questions. The good news is I don't anticipate this is going to take 8 or 9 hours, like with some of our meetings, and, in fact, may be a relatively short amount of time. I would like to begin with some of the issues that Mr. Swalwell has brought up. And, if you were, in reflecting back on this investigation and some of the direction and people that have become well known for or through this process, I think you would have to include Mr. Carter Page and George Papadopoulos in that. And so we would like to understand better you and Mr. Sessions and, by extension, Mr. Trump's relationship with them. So, although you've described it a little bit, would you just review your familiarity with Mr. Page? When you first got to meet him, how often you interacted with him, your knowledge of his background, and then there's more, but I'll let you start there. Mr. Dearborn: don't know him, never met him, don't believe I interacted with him. If in any way I remember some email about his references of his view on policy and representing himself being with the campaign. And I did alert individuals to say, look, I don't know what this guy is saying, but I don't think he should be representing the candidate's position because I don't believe that he has the right to do that. That's not his role. But I don't believe there is a relationship. I don't believe Jeff Sessions had a relationship with him either. Mr. Stewart of Utah: okay, and we're going to help. I think refresh your memory is we'd like to provide you with some emails. In fact, much of my questioning is going to be referencing emails and interactions you've had through that. Mr. Dearborn: okay. Mr. Stewart of Utah: and this one, which is the first one there, should be labeled RD 000114. And I believe that's right. If you see it on the top right-hand corner there. Dearborn: right. Stewart of Utah: and you've expressed, Mr. Dearborn, I'm going to characterize it and tell me if you think I'm wrong. Dearborn: okay. Stewart of Utah: as I understand it, you had some concerns with Mr. Page's apparent history of making statements to the media, and sometimes reflecting that those were the official positions of the campaign, and you had concerns or issues with that. Is that? Dearborn: that is correct. Stewart of Utah: so looking at this email that I provided with you there, the back part of it is apparently a list of questions from a Washington Post reporter provided to Mr. Page. And he went through a long series of answers to them and then wanted to, I guess, kind of vet that back through the campaign or through officials there. Dearborn: right. Stewart of Utah: and at one point there, it's looping in Rick Dearborn on this. So at that point, you became involved. Dearborn: right. Stewart of Utah: and highlighting some of your comments. Quote, Carter has had to be reined in before, unquote. Could you elaborate on that? Is there anything that you would add to that to help us have context in that comment? Mr. Dearborn: and I think I say it right. The second point right after that statement, Carter has been reined in before. Remember, he took a poke at the Prime Minister on the candidate's behalf. And I guess this was my assumption. It was out of loyalty. But he shouldn't have said anything. In other words, he wasn't authorized to say anything. Stewart of Utah: okay, if you flip the page over, there's another portion there. Midway down, it says, bottom line, quote, bottom line, Carter Page can't make news on DJT, unquote. That would be Donald J. Trump. And I'm assuming DJT is Donald J. Trump. Mr. Dearborn: yes. Mr. Stewart of Utah: quote, on Donald J. Trump's behalf, unquote. Do you see that comment there? Dearborn, is it on 118? Where is it? Stewart of Utah, these aren't numbered. It would be the third page if you count from Mr. Conway at the top. The numbers are at the top. Mr. Stewart of Utah. Yeah, okay, it would be on 16. Mr. Dearborn, 16. All right. Stewart of Utah. And towards the lower third, quote, bottom line, Carter Page can't make news on DJT's behalf, unquote. Dearborn, yes, I'm sorry. The question was, Stewart of Utah, again, would you elaborate on that? Was there a reason why you had... Dearborn, sure. He wasn't authorized on behalf of the campaign to make statements for the candidate. Mr. Stewart of Utah, and did he, to your knowledge, present himself to the press as a spokesman or as someone who was authorized to make comments such as that? Mr. Dearborn, well, I think... Stewart of Utah, did he exaggerate or expand on his role in the campaign or his importance to the campaign? Dearborn, I think that's the reason why I'm answering the way I am, because I felt like he was. Stewart of Utah, okay, and if you flip the page over to the second page now, page 115, at the bottom there's a highlighted, quote, do not, unquote. Quote, don't touch it, unquote. Mr. Dearborn, don't touch it, from John Mashburn. Stewart of Utah, yes. Dearborn, uh-huh. Stewart of Utah, and would you have concurred with that? Dearborn, yes, and I did. Stewart of Utah, yeah, all right. Is there anything else that you would tell us that you could add to the Carter-Page relationship with the campaign that we haven't questioned you about at this point? Mr. Dearborn, no, I honestly think this was the extent of his relationship with the campaign from my vantage point. Mr. Stewart of Utah, okay, the other individual we mentioned was George Papadopoulos, who... Mr. Dearborn, right.